In today's landscape photography adventure, I'll be hiking 51 miles to capture one photo. You'll learn some of my favorite composition, photo editing, and camera techniques, including how to find the best composition in the mountains, how to shoot when the light and conditions are changing quickly, the optimal sharp focus strategy for mountain photography, plus some of my favorite landscape photography photo editing techniques, including focus stacking. Let's dive in and get to the adventure. So we've been hiking all day, just got up to this alpine lake out in the middle of nowhere. See, the conditions are pretty absurd right now, and back in here there's huge peaks that I was out hiking in yesterday's video, and they're completely enshrouded in clouds right now, but I'm hoping those clouds will dissipate. They have been, but if not, I can probably find something in here. It's looking pretty good. Our tents are set up right over here. Give you guys a quick tour of camp and then start setting up some compositions. Hopefully I'll come up with something good here and these clouds don't just completely roll in. When we were starting our hike today, clouds were starting to come up the valley, and then they've just pushed more and more all day. Last night, I was camped up on the top of this peak. You guys can check out my last video from this trip. But the wind was bad, but then it got real bad, and that's why we decided to tuck our tents down here tonight, because the wind was so bad last night. I probably got like, I don't know, my watch said I got 3 hours of sleep. It's just broken sleep, so wasn't too good for that. And then it started pouring rain around 6 a.m. along with like 40-mile-an-hour winds. I like this view over here too. And then after it started pouring rain, the sun came up and there was a double rainbow, full half circle. The peaks were just getting blasted. Rain was pouring in, wind was pouring in. I tried to get some shots off and it was so bad that I couldn't even get one good shot off. So hopefully I'll make up for it tonight with some good conditions. But I'm gonna go over here, get a quick dinner, and start setting up some comps after I'm done with dinner. See you guys soon. So this is hands down my favorite shot of the trip so far. Came back over to the lake. See, it's right there. Really nice fog rolling through. And here's the composition. And I shot it when there was still a bunch of fog up at those peaks, but I love these flowers down here. You can see they're like blue and purple, white. So what I do with this composition is I use the flowers on the right-hand side to move the eyes and grab them and move them in. And then you also see these ferns or whatever they are pushing that way. So this kind of brings your eyes right into this center part of the scene. And then if I pull this level off, you can see a little bit better. And then I have the reflection of the lake filling the center part. For scale, I have this little tree here, and then it leads back into these big peaks back here. So here's the final image that I'm about to show you guys how to capture. So first we're gonna go through camera technique and focusing strategies, how I got this one in the field. And then we're gonna dive into the composition strategies on the computer, and then I'll show you how to combine all the images together, give you some Photoshop and photo editing tips that'll really help you out for landscape photography. So for this one, I have my wide angle lens on. I'm shooting at 24 millimeters, and I had to focus stack this one. So what I did here, I always like to start from the back. So first shot, I'm just gonna focus on that little tree right here. If I focus on that, that'll cover from that tree all the way back to this peak. These conditions are ridiculous. So I'm gonna zoom in there, back button focus, that looks super sharp. And then from there, zoom back out. And I'm gonna shoot these at f/16. It's gonna help me blend this focus stack together a lot easier. So I'll just expose for this first one. I'm just gonna grab my exposure, expose to the right. Looks good there. And then I'm gonna grab my circular polarizer. I'm just gonna twist it, watching the back of the scene. You can see how it opens up as you twist it. You can get a lot more detail back there. So I'm just twisting it until it looks good to my eyes. And in all reality, you should do that before you grab the focus point, but I was focused down here in the foreground, so I had to refocus first, but I'll just grab that focal point again. That looks good. Histogram was in check. That looks good. ISO 64, that gives me 1/2.5 seconds. So that should work. I'm gonna push this up to ISO 200, just give me a little bit faster shutter speed. And then 2-second timer, and I'll fire this first one off. And I'll review the first ones I took. The light was really good just a second ago because the sun was actually hitting those peaks. I'll pull this up on the computer after I'm done shooting. So
for that first one, there's the one I took. That one's killer. It's clipped a little bit. It's not a big deal. That won't be blown out on the raw file. These are just the JPEG files. That one's real nice. Man, I'm excited to get these on the computer. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see where this focus point drops off from that first shot I just took. So here's the shot I just took. Zoom in on the tree, make sure it's sharp. Make sure everything behind that's sharp. And I'm just going to zoom down, see where it drops off. So it starts to drop off a little bit right on those ferns, which is right there. So what I'll do is I'll just take this focal point and I'll put it right there. Back button focus to refocus. All the other settings will still stay the same. That's what's nice about aperture priority. So I'll fire that one off. Check and make sure it's sharp. Looks good. And then I want to make sure it moves back to where that other focus point was. So I'm just going to scroll through these real quick so I can see. All right, that looks good. And then I'm going to zoom in again, and I'll see where it drops off. So I'm just scrolling down. It starts to drop off right about those flowers there. So I'll just drop a third focal point, splitting where it dropped off to the bottom of the scene. So I'll just zoom in here, back button focus, fire another one off. Still no mountains behind me, but I can't complain with this shot. Easily my favorite shot of the trip.
So what you're looking at here is the raw file, but let's just go through a few tips that I used to set up this composition. One thing to keep in mind when you're shooting mountain photography or anything with large scenes in it, throw some stuff into it that shows scale, because with a wide angle lens it can be really hard to tell. So even though we have these flowers in the foreground, they're very small. The wide angle lens is always going to stretch them. So things that are in the bottom, say quarter or third of your image, use the wide angle lens to stretch them out if they're interesting. But if they're uninteresting, such as this tree right here, put them towards the center of the composition, and that's going to shrink them down. Other things to look at for scale. If underneath your mountain peaks, you can put anything that shows the size of them, such as trees, your brain will fill in the normal size of trees, and then they can compare them to the mountains, and you'll know they're big peaks. Other things to look for when you're shooting wide. Notice how at the top of this image, I put the peaks towards the very top. Whenever you're shooting wide, like I said, you can use this to stretch the bottom of the scene for the flowers, but anything in the top third to a quarter is going to stretch the top of the scene as well. So by putting the peaks near the top, it really stretches them out, shooting at 14 millimeters, and they're going to show a lot more sense of scale in the overall image. A few other things that I did here is I wanted to balance the eyes across the scene or have them move in the way that I wanted. One of the biggest things you can do as you improve at photography composition is you move the viewer's eyes through the scene and they don't even know why. So anything that's bright or saturated is going to grab the eyes. So when you look at this scene, your eyes will probably grab here first, and then they're going to start to move back some other way into the scene through bright and saturated things. So they might move up here, they might hit this tree, and then move back into this point. The other thing you can use is leading lines through contrast separation. Notice how this line right here is highly contrasted. I mean, there's something light and then there's something dark. If you can use that to split up the scene, jump back here, into different portions, this makes it much easier for your eyes to sense depth in the scene. So notice how these highly contrasted lines all through the scene are different distances away. If you can separate these so they're clearly separated, it can allow you to see the depth. And what I mean by that is if you had this tree right here that's close to the center of the scene, but it went up way into this part, let's say this tree extended up here, it starts to lose image separation, meaning it starts to get all jumbled up with the part of the scene that's further away, and you can't show this depth. So when I was setting this up, I wanted the lens to be low enough that I could easily decipher between the foreground, the midground, and the background, and they would each show in different parts of the scene. Now in the background, we have different amounts of light hitting. I took multiple different exposures for this, as I'll show you here in a moment. But anytime you have a scene and it's getting hit with light, make sure there's light hitting things you want the viewer to look at. So these peaks are one of the main centers of attention. These flowers are one of the main centers of attention. And then we have things that are dark like this right here, and this right here. They add to the photo, showing scale, or in this case, showing color that offsets this blue right here. I'm just using color harmony here. You guys can Google Dave Morrow color harmony. I have a complete PDF guide on this. You can download it. It'll teach you all about it. But as far as things that are dark, use them to fill in the viewer's sense of scale or other perspectives on the scene to tell the story of the scene. But if you separate these things out between bright, and then it goes dark, and then bright again, and then dark again, these constant transitions and contrasts will keep the viewer's eyes moving. Your goal as a landscape photographer is, as soon as the person that's viewing the photo's eyes get bored and they stop moving around the scene, then they're going to stop looking at the photo and they're going to move on to another photo. You want to have them immersed in the photo for at least 5 to 10 seconds. So like, oh, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. And their eyes are just darting all over the scene. So now we have all the shots loaded up here. And what I highly recommend to you guys is become an expert at hyperfocal distance and back button focus. I have a complete guide on this. I'll link it down below this video. My complete step-by-step focusing technique, because you don't want to overcomplicate by doing focus stacking when you don't need to. I probably focus stack on 1% of my shots. And if you don't know when you need to and when you don't, then you're just going to make your life more complicated. So for these first 2 shots over here, these were focused at hyperfocal. And I took 2 separate images to capture different cloud movement in the scene. So remember, I focused approximately right in here in the scene, and you can see it's super sharp. And then I just waited through these clouds to come through, and I took that first one, and then I took this one, which is probably my favorite one. I actually like this second one for this whole part of the scene. I like how that diffuse cloud kicks through there. But over here, it's a little bit too bright. And I like how this one's slightly more diffuse over there, so I can easily blend those together. So take as many as you need of these different for the cloud movement or whatever else. Anywhere that the clouds or light isn't changing, such as down here, you don't need to take separate shots unless it's for focus. So after I took these 2, in the field, I'm looking from this first hyperfocal shot and saying, where does the focus start to drop off? You can see it starts to drop off right in here, but it really drops off down here in the foreground. So all I do is I take a second shot that's focused right about where it starts to drop off. So now that's focused from here. You can see it's super sharp compared to that other one. And then it's going to start to drop off somewhere down here in the foreground. So you find that area, and then you would just refocus on it. So then I just refocus down there. Now sometimes if you're really close with your wide angle lens, you can see it starts to still drop off down here. If you wanted to take an extra shot just to make sure, you could refocus here, but I still think that's acceptably sharp. But if you wanted to take one just to compare and contrast on your computer, that's focused right there, so you can see the difference. It's not huge. I'll probably just end up using this. So I don't need this one. I can just hit delete there. And once you have these, I just go through and edit the first one. A few editing tips for you. I like to have these only open by themselves, and I like to have them ordered in the order that I go about editing. So I always go in this exact direction when editing. So if you right click over here, you can click edit panels to show, and you can click the ones you want. Then you can also click on a specific panel, hit the arrow up and down, and it will change its location. So get these in the order that you always edit, and then it'll always be there for you really easily. If you want to change this so only a single tab opens at a time, it'll make your editing a lot cleaner. Just right click and go single panel mode. My goal is to have only things that I need shown on the screen. So I'll edit the top file. Once I edit it, these would be unedited still. I can just hold shift and select them all. Then I'll right click up here on the top file and click sync settings. And then these will only pull up my defaults that are shown over here. That's why these are unchecked, and I can hit OK. And I've already done this, but it would sync all the raw file edits up there. Now I can just hit open objects here. You want to make sure that these are smart objects when you're regularly editing photos. It'll make your editing process way cleaner. So I cover that in my past videos. If you want to learn about smart objects, just start digging through my videos. Next thing I'm going to do is hit open objects here. This will open them in a bunch of separate tabs over here in Photoshop. So we can see it'll open them in the exact order that you shot them in. That's why it's so important to shoot in the same order every time. Then it's going to be very easy to blend. So this is my base file taken for the mountains and the peaks up here, focused at hyperfocal. This was that second shot. So if I just click over here on that, go to copy, and go back to my base file. So we now have base, and then I just pasted this on here. Base 2. You can label these whatever you want. clouds. And then we can close that one because I just copied it over. This one is the second focal point. So you could just copy it. You can just hit over here and Command C if you want, or Control C, and then Control V. This would be center, ground, focus. And then we can close this one. And then we have this one. This is going to be the even closer focus. So you can just copy this one. F foreground focus. And then you can see if that covers down low enough for you. You can see that's the center ground right here. And you can see the foreground focus is much sharper in there. So I can close that one. And then you can decide if you wanted this last one or not. This is that immediate sharp foreground. We can just do it for the heck of it. So I can just grab that one too. And then this will be closest focus. So now we have all of these. And what you're going to notice is these are smart objects. We can just go to full screen now. And since they are smart objects, the problem is that you can click them and you can jump back to camera raw. But you'll notice that if I zoom in close here, notice how the image slightly shifts when I shift my focal point. So if I uncover all these, this is called focal point breathing. If we go on pixel level, you can probably see it a little bit better. See how it slightly shifts? That's called focus breathing. So if you try to blend these without lining them up first, it actually won't work very well. So what you have to do here is unfortunate because you can't stand the smart object workflow. You have to do what's called rasterize these. So I can click the top one, hold shift, click the bottom one. If I right click over here to the side, you can see it says rasterize layers. All that does is remove them from the smart object workflow. Now, what I like to do is I like to make sure that all my basic raw edits are done and everything looks good before I do that. Then I can have this selection going and go up here to edit. And under edit, I can go to auto align layers. And I can go to auto. Don't mess with any of these, leave them unchecked. And all this is going to do is it's going to line up the pixels of all the images. So you're not going to have that focal breathing anymore. So now they all should be perfectly lined up. All right. So now what I like to do is I have my base file. I just put a black layer mask over all of these. So now all I'm looking at here is my base file. The first thing I want to blend through, I'm just going to grab my masking brush, is I want to blend through the clouds that I want over here. So if I hold shift and I hide this one, I want to bring through that little peak poking through and this diffuse light over here. So what's nice about having this set up with all black layers is all you do is just paint white on the area you want to show through a little bit. So I'll do that, and then you can hold shift again and get an idea. Just scanning through the image, I'm just scanning through the area that I shot it for. And when you're hiding it, that's what you'll be brushing through too. So I like everything else about that one. I'm happy with it. So that one's good to go. Then we have center ground focus. So that's going to cover us, if we hold shift, from here where the focus started to drop off, down into the foreground. So you could just blend over this whole area. I'm going to go at a opacity 100 and just blend it down as far as you want because these other ones are stacked on top of it. So if you just blend it down to the foreground, just watching where it's white over here, and just make sure you have a good blend there, now it's super sharp, super easy. The next one is this foreground focus one. So you can just hold shift and see where that's showing up. And then you can balance out the light later. If they have slight shifts in tonal value, it's not a big deal. So for this one, we'll just blend it from where the center ground focus started to drop off, right in here. And then just make sure you're covered out on all your edges, watching the white over here. All right, so that one's good. And then this one is going to be the closest focus. So this one will just cover our entire immediate foreground. So we can just blend it in. And you don't want to go too far back in here because you'll start brushing back into your foreground focus. All right, and then just check it out to make sure it's super sharp. Now I can group all these and I can check them against the base. Now you can really tell, right? So you can see this is the base image, meaning my hyperfocal shot, which is somewhere right in here. And then you can really see how much sharpness that adds to the overall photo. It's a lot, right? So this is where you could start your basics of your editing from here on out. So do that a few times. It'll get really easy, but just make it easy for yourself and just always stack them in the exact same way. Always shoot them in the exact same order, meaning hyperfocal first and then moving back towards the foreground. And then just have a process for yourself, and then it'll be super easy once you do it a few times. But make sure to download that PDF I have below on hyperfocal distance and back button focus. This is really going to help you out because I don't use this technique that often. But when you need it, you really need it, because for this shot, I couldn't have done it at this focal length without using focus stacking. It's just absolutely impossible. So one problem you may run into here is you're going to have this little edge on the bottom of the photo where the image is lined up, but you can see it's a little weird along the edges. You have this blank, but it's also kind of pixelated along that bottom edge, and you probably have it over along one of the side edges too. Now, there's no need to lose your actual crop factor of the image. Instead of doing that, we can stretch the photo a little bit to maintain the same crop factor so you can still print this photo. So I'm just going to go to the top layer over here and hit Shift, Option, Command, and E. That's on a Mac. It'd be Shift, Alt, Control, and E on a PC. It's just merge all visible to new layer. And we'll call this Free Transform. So on this layer, you can see if I turn it on and off, it doesn't do anything because it just looks exactly like the layers underneath it. You can just go to Edit and Free Transform. And instead of having to crop this out, you can just drag that edge down like that. And then you can go back over to this edge and you can just grab it. You can just pull it over to the edge like that. And now if you hit enter, you might want to check the other edges too first. But if those look good, you can just hit enter. And after hitting enter on the screen, it'll just make that your brand new image. So if you look behind me now, you can see the very top of one of those peaks that I was talking about. And this range stretches the whole way through here. And the peak I was on last night is right behind those clouds. So I'm hoping this is going to open up because all these trees down here look awesome. You can see this fog's just rolling up the valley. And about 20 miles straight down there's a huge river that drains out of all these glaciers. And it goes to the Puget Sound. And that's where the fog rolls up out of the Puget Sound. So I was just working on a composition here. Pull it up on the screen here. And a second ago, there was lots of fog. It worked really well. So that's one tip that is really going to help you out with landscape photography. If you're shooting a location that has a lot of different potentials and there's constantly changing conditions, the light's changing, there might be fog rolling through, clouds rolling through, whatever else, walk around with your camera in hand an hour or two before the light gets good, and you don't even have to use your tripod. Just take some practice composition. So I was up on this little mound earlier where the lake is. It's right behind that mound. Our tent's right there. And then I was up on that. And then I'm down here now working on some compositions. And I like to just set them up. First, I'll walk around with my camera in hand and just kind of eye them out. Then I'll set them up with the tripod, go through the process of actually shooting them. So I really have the composition dialed in, because I'm sure you guys know this. Like, you've had this happen before, right? You're shooting a composition and you have it close, but there's all these minute changes that you need to make. And if you don't do it before the light's good, oftentimes you'll find that last minute change or the one after that it has the best composition in it, you don't get until the lights disappear. And then you're like, dang, man, I wish I would have got that one. So walking around beforehand, scouting it out without the tripod, setting up the tripod, going through the workflow process, like where you should focus, dialing in the composition, thinking about the exposure, all that kind of stuff is really useful. So for this composition I just shot, it's actually starting to roll back through again. But what I like to do here is, since we have this big peak back here, I'm gonna hold that to the back left. So if you ever wanna balance your photo, just split it right down the middle. You guys can check out my video on composition tips. I think it's called 5 composition secrets you never heard of. Google that or put it in YouTube and it'll come up. But if you split this right down the middle, put something in the back left or the back right or both, just offsetting those. And then have something in the bottom left or the bottom right to show scale in the opposite direction. So you can see I have this main dominant peak right back here in the back left. And so long as it's to the left of center, just eye it up
wherever it looks good. And then you show something diagonal from it with scale. So I have these trees here. Without those trees, you wouldn't be able to tell how large this peak is. And then you have all this really nice fog rolling through here. If there wasn't fog there, it wouldn't work at all. But that's a really good way to make mountain shots work. And then you can also look up at the top of the shot. Notice how I hardly left any space at the top. If there were big clouds rolling through and they had a lot of detail, I might leave more space. But if there's not a whole lot going on besides fog in the top, you don't want a whole lot of repeating space. If there was just blue sky and then it went up and up and up, it's going to make the mountains look really small and the sky look really big. So if you don't have much going on the top, make the mountain close to the top, but you don't want to cut it off or even get any closer than I am right there. There's those peaks. They're going to come through. There's the peak I was on last night. I have a feeling I'm going to get lucky tonight. But for this shot, super easy shot after you get the composition dialed in. I just focused right here on this tree. Zoom in at 100%, back button focus. That looks sharp, but if it wasn't, I just jiggle the focal ring back and forth, as I always do. I always start at f11. And then the last week's video, or last video of my adventure from over there, I was talking about shutter speed. So I'm always starting at base ISO, and then I'll increase the ISO if I need a faster shutter speed. But first I need to set the histogram. So I'm just gonna pull the histogram up, and I'm just gonna push it all the way to the right. So a good habit to get used to when you're first starting exposing to the right, make sure to just grab the exposure compensation and aperture priority and back it way dark, because sometimes there'll be little spikes hanging off the right you can't see. And then just push it up until the very right hand spike is just touching the right. And that looks good. So now that kicks out for ISO 64, 1/30 or 1/30th of a second. So that should be good to go, because there's nothing moving in here. Those trees aren't moving. Nothing else in the scene's moving. There's no wind. I'm not going to shoot this one, but if I did, I would just fire it. And then those were the compositions. I think this one's going to turn out really well. I like the second one more because you can see that. But usually when I'm shooting fog, what I like to do, since it's constantly moving through, is once you have your composition set up and your focus dialed in, everything else is dialed in, just take multiple exposures of it. So wait for the fog to change, and you can overlay them and blend different parts of them together, or you might just have one exposure that you like the most. But having multiples under any dynamic conditions is going to ensure that you get the best shot.
So what I recommend to you guys is when you first get used to this technique of picking a composition and then shooting as different conditions roll through, take a lot of shots. I've been doing this for a while, so I knew what shots I wanted, so I only took 2. I took 1, which I consider the main shot right here. And I really like everything about this shot. But what I don't like is the lighting here is a little bit different than here. You can see how the shadows are a lot more opened up here as the light hits. I would like to add some contrast from this second shot that I took down here. In the first shot, I like how diffuse it is up here. I actually might bring a little bit of detail in here from the second shot. That's why it's so nice just leaving your composition set up, and as the light changes, constantly shoot. When I first started to do this, and still, some compositions I'll take 5 or 6, and then I'll get back and I'll be like, okay, well, I definitely have a favorite, because sometimes you can't tell on the back of the camera screen which is your favorite. So take more and then just throw them away when you get home. And what I'll usually do with these is I'll just edit one. I'll just pick my favorite one out of the set, and then I'll do all my raw file edits for it in Camera Raw. And then you can just select all the other images below it. And if you right click, you can just hit sync settings, and then it'll sync those edits across all the shots. And then you can do some balancing in Photoshop. So what's really nice about this method is you can open these as objects in Photoshop. Both of these will pop up as separate tabs here. See, here's one tab, here's 2 tabs. You can just right click over here, make sure that layer is selected, and go up to edit, copy, and then go to your other tab and go to edit, paste. And now you have them both overlaid. What's really nice about the smart objects I use is if I double click one of these, it pops right back into Camera Raw. That's why I use Camera Raw instead of Lightroom. They both have the same processing engine, but Camera Raw is just way better for jumping back and forth through Photoshop. So you could just pick one of these for your base image. I actually like this one for the base image. It's just the bottom one. I always leave the base image on the bottom. And then you could say, okay, for this image, I'm just going to cover everything up, and you can hold shift and see if there's any parts you want to mask through of this other image. So if you wanted to bring some of the shadows in, I'll just grab a masking brush here and we'll go pretty low percentage. But remember, as I was talking about way to move the eyes through the photo, things that aren't super interesting you can keep somewhat dark, because dark things won't draw your eyes, but bright saturated things will draw your eyes. So if I wanted to see all this detail in the trees down here, but I didn't want to grab the eyes too much, I would keep them somewhat dark. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, this is not a heck yeah portfolio image for me. I'm just showing you guys some techniques. The next one in the shoot definitely is. And then I can see if there's anywhere else I want to mask through on this one. I like all this diffuse light up here, but I might want to see a little bit of this mountain peeking through. So I'll just go low opacity here and we can brush through a little bit of that. See how that shows a little bit more of the mountain and it fills it into your brain that there's a peak flowing through back there. It also keeps this line that's going through the back center of the photo congruent. I don't want to brush in the whole thing. And then I'm just scanning my eyes through the photo. Usually I'll start at the bottom and just scan up through the photo and blend these together. So now I've combined both of those together, and that's just my base blend. And you can go from there, but you can do that with as many photos as you want. The key thing when you're doing this is don't change your focal point, because it will slightly shift the photo and that can screw you up.